All right, my friends, before we start our first story on our new topic, we need to review some important things that happened in our country's history. We're going to go all the way back to the very beginning of the United States of America. When America was first starting out, let me show you a picture of what America looks like today. This is what our country looks like today. We have a total of 50 different states. So our states are ways that we split up land. Our states are shown in different colors on this map. Today we have 50 of them. But way back in the 1700s, when America was first starting out, it didn't look like this. We didn't have all of these states. When America was first starting out, there were only 13 different states, or at that time they were called colonies. We call these the 13 original colonies. These 13 original colonies were located along the East Coast. So these states along the East Coast and in this area were all part of our 13 original colonies. At the time, they were not the United States of America yet. Those 13 original colonies belonged to Great Britain. On our map of the world, we have got the United States right here. Great Britain was all the way across the sea, right here. It's very hard to see. You can see there's a tiny little orange country that says London. At the time, Great Britain included a couple other countries in this area. Great Britain at the time was ruled by a man named King George, so they still had a king, and he was in charge of the 13 original colonies as well. But people who lived in the 13 original colonies started to think that they didn't want to be part of Great Britain anymore. They wanted to be separate from Great Britain, or independent. Remember, independent means that you are on your own or don't need help. So some very smart and wise men wrote a paper to King George explaining that the people who lived in those 13 original colonies were going to form their own nation independent of Great Britain. We call that very important paper the Declaration of Independence, because they were declaring our independence from King George. We still have the same paper that those men wrote the Declaration of Independence on today. It is kept very, very safe in Washington, D.C. Here is a picture of the Declaration of Independence. This was signed on July 4th, 1776. This is why we celebrate Independence Day, or the 4th of July on that day. This is when we officially decided that we were going to be our own country, separate from Great Britain. I've created a timeline to help us organize some of the events that we'll be talking about. So in 1776, we signed the Declaration of Independence. After the Declaration of Independence was signed, a series of different events led up to something big. One of those events that you might be familiar with is called the Boston Tea Party. Remember, in the Boston Tea Party, people who lived in the colonies were upset at the taxation or extra money that they had to pay for tea. And all of that extra money went to King George. To show that they were upset, they took thousands and thousands of dollars worth of valuable tea and dumped it into the ocean. It wasn't a real tea party. That's just what we called that protest that they showed. This was one of many similar events that sparked what we call the Revolutionary War. A revolution means that you are overthrowing something and replacing it with something else. We were revolting against Great Britain and King George. The Revolutionary War lasted for several years. Someone you might recognize from the Revolutionary War is this man named Paul Revere. Paul Revere was an important founding father who warned about British soldiers approaching. We'll put him next to the Revolutionary War on our timeline. The Revolutionary War lasted several years. When it was over, the colonizers, the people who lived in the 13 original colonies, had won. But now they had a new nation. They had a brand new nation to build, and they had to decide what the government of their nation was going to be. They decided that they didn't want to have a king. Do we have a king in the United States of America today? No, we don't. Our founding fathers, or the men that started the government in our country, spent a long time deciding what our government would look like and what kind of laws and rules we would have. They wrote down all of those laws and rules in another very important piece of paper. Again, we still have this paper today. This is what it looks like. This very important piece of paper is called the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States of America is a list of our laws and rules and how our government is organized and how it works. In our government in the United States of America, instead of a king, we have a president. And we have a Senate and a Congress and a House and different people to help represent all of the people in our nation. The Constitution made it so that the people had a say in their laws and rules. What kind of government does that sound like? It is a type of democracy where our people get to vote on laws and leaders and have a say in their rules and their government. After the Constitution was signed after the Revolutionary War, and after our first couple of presidencies, we're going to jump in our timeline all the way up to 1812. In 1812, many interesting and important things were happening in the United States and in other parts of the world. Lots of kings and queens in other countries were taken out of power, and lots of other countries were changing their government and rules as well. In 1812, the United States was gaining new states and territories and was becoming a strong new nation. As a new nation who just got out of a very long and difficult war with Great Britain, the United States wanted to avoid conflict or other wars with other countries. The United States was also growing in strength and wealth. As a nation, it depended on trading with both France and Britain. So we were able to repair our relationship with Britain, and we traded with them, and we depended on that trade. When a war broke out between these two countries, between France and Britain, this greatly affected the United States. It made trading with them difficult, and it hurt the US economy. It also led to a second war between America and Great Britain. That war is what we're going to be talking about in our next domain. This war is called the War of 1812. The War of 1812 started between France and Great Britain. Now remember, America had just fixed its relationship with Great Britain after the Revolutionary War. But it also had a good relationship with France because France helped the people who lived in the 13 original colonies. France helped them fight against Britain. So we wanted to keep our relationship with Britain good and keep our relationship with France going strong as well. So this led to a lot of trickiness for our leaders back in 1812. And we'll talk about all of the events that happened, starting with our first read aloud. I know that's a lot of background information, but we'll start talking about the War of 1812 now in our first story. First, though, as always, even though we just did a lot of background information, there's still a little bit more we need to do. We need to do our vocabulary words. Trade. Trade is the business of buying and selling goods. Long ago, colonial farmers depended on trade with others in the town square in order to get the things that they need. Seize. To seize something means to use official power to take it. Julius Caesar was a Roman general who wanted to seize control of the Roman government. Blockaded. Blockaded means stopped people or supplies from coming into or going out of a country. Represent means to speak for or take action in place of someone else. The President of the United States is elected to represent the people of our country. I'm going to read a list of groups or individuals. For each individual or group, I want you to tell me who or what they represent. Let's start with the Governor of Utah. The Governor of Utah works to represent the people of our state. The Mayor of Spanish Fork. The Mayor works to represent the people in our town. From 1775 to 1783, America fought Great Britain for independence. This conflict was called the Revolutionary War. Against all odds, America won. What had been the 13 original colonies officially became the United States of America. After gaining independence, the American people did not want kings or queens governing them anymore. Americans wanted to create a new kind of government. They wanted to be able to elect individuals to represent the people and act with their best interests in mind. They wanted a government that was by the people, for the people. To help create the new form of government, several elected leaders met in Philadelphia in May and June of 1787. Some leaders who could not attend, such as Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, wrote down their ideas. Thomas Jefferson was the third president of the United States, and John Adams was the second. Together, this group of leaders became known as the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers' ideas all came together in a document called the U.S. Constitution. The Constitution became the framework for the American government. A framework is a basic structure of something. A man named James Madison had a clear vision of how the United States should govern itself. James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution because he put all of the ideas together by writing the Constitution with the help of George Washington and others. He also became the fourth president of the United States. For many years after the Revolutionary War, the United States grew larger and wealthier. New states such as Vermont, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, and Louisiana were added. New territories were also settled. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory from France. This purchase more than doubled the size of the United States. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, France and Britain went to war against each other. This series of wars became known as the Napoleonic Wars, named after the French leader at the time, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte wanted to make France the most powerful nation in the world. Britain was determined to stop him. The United States considered both France and Great Britain to be its friends. It did not want to get involved in these costly and destructive wars. Even though the Napoleonic Wars were being fought all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, they greatly affected the United States. Much of the United States' growth during this time depended upon trade with France and Great Britain. Britain and France had many merchant or trading ships. These ships sailed across the Atlantic to trade goods with the United States, Canada, and with many of the British and French-owned islands in the Caribbean. For example, The United States sent flour and tobacco to France and Great Britain. Great Britain and France received sugar and coffee or cocoa from other countries. Both countries wanted to stop the other from trading with the United States. They each also tried to prevent the other from getting money and supplies. They also did not want the United States to choose sides. To keep the French from trading with the United States, the British blockaded several US ports. That means that they blocked them so that other ships could not access them. They also blocked several important ports in Europe. This seriously hurt US trade. France and Britain both had large naval fleets positioned in the Atlantic Ocean to attack each other's ships. To make matters worse, the British and the French began to seize or capture American ships loaded with valuable cargo. It became almost impossible to safely transport goods from the United States to foreign ports. It was also more and more difficult for Americans to receive much-needed goods. Merchant ships weren't the only ships in the sea. The United States and Great Britain also had naval ships. Life in the British Navy was not easy. Conditions on their naval ships were terrible, and punishments were harsh. Because of this, the British Navy had a hard time finding men who wanted to be sailors. To get more sailors, the British began to capture men from other countries' ships and force them to join the British Navy. Sometimes these sailors were British deserters. A deserter is someone who runs away from military duty. However, more times than not, the sailors who were seized weren't even British, but that did not stop the British from doing it. They even seized many US sailors. This practice of forcing men into the British Navy was called impressment. The impressment of US citizens upset the American people and the US government. As time went on, the United States found that it was losing more and more valuable cargo, sailors, money, and even ships. They demanded that the British stop impressing American sailors, but the British refused. All right, there was a lot of info in that first read aloud, and I'm going to ask a couple questions about it to make sure we understood all of that info that we learned about. My first question is, how was the United States after the Revolutionary War different from the colonies before the Revolutionary War? So we're comparing and contrasting. How was the United States after the Revolutionary War different from the colonies before the war? There were lots of differences. Remember, before the war, we were part of Great Britain and were ruled by a king. But after the war, we created our own government with a president and a type of democracy where people were able to vote and have a say in their government. What is the name of the document that became the framework for the American government? That document is the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence said that we were separate from Great Britain, but the framework for our government was the Constitution. I think I erased that a little bit. Sorry about that, friends. Who are the founding fathers? Our founding fathers were the men who helped write the Constitution and played an important role in our government. Why is James Madison called the father of the Constitution? James Madison played a very important role in helping to write the Constitution. We'll learn a lot about James Madison in this domain. What do you think the United States was like shortly after the Revolutionary War? What was happening in the United States in the years after the Revolutionary War? After the Revolutionary War, we were getting bigger and bigger. We were gaining territories from other countries, and we were gaining more wealth as well. One of those areas that we gained was purchased by a man named Thomas Jefferson. He was one of our founding fathers. What was it that he purchased? He purchased a very large area of land. Do you remember what it was called? It was the Louisiana Territory. We call that the Louisiana Purchase when he bought it from the country France. What was happening between France and Great Britain in the years after the Revolutionary War? Were they getting along with each other? No, France and Great Britain were at war. We call those wars that they were fighting the Napoleonic Wars, because Napoleon was the leader of France at the time. We talked about a term today called impressment. What does that mean? What is impressment? Impressment was when British soldiers captured other soldiers and forced them to join the British Navy. Do you think that was making those other countries very happy? No. What things did the British do during its war with France that angered the United States? So not that angered France, but that angered the United States. The British were stopping American ships, and they were impressing American soldiers as well, not just France soldiers, but American soldiers. They also blockaded a lot of US ports, so that means that they blocked them. They formed a wall of ships that kept the US from trading. And remember, the US was dependent on trade, so they needed to be able to trade. Why do you think the British and French did not want the United States to choose sides? I think they were both nervous that the United States would choose the opposite side, and they knew that that would give them a very big advantage and make it easier for them to win the war. All right, my friends, we are going to learn more about this in our next lesson. I know it's a lot of information, but we're going to learn a lot of cool things about this one. For now, I want you to open up the PDF that's attached to this assignment. I'm going to jump on my computer so I can show you what to do. Alright, I want to talk a little bit about portraits. A portrait is a painting, drawing, or photograph of a person that usually includes the person's head and shoulders. Here we have a portrait of our first president, George Washington. This one's a little bit different because it includes more than just his head and shoulders. Here is a portrait of John Adams. And here is one of Thomas Jefferson. In the 1800s, because cameras had not been invented yet, portraits were usually hand-drawn or painted. Today, for our assignment, we are going to be making our own self-portrait. A self-portrait is a portrait of yourself. We have a very fancy frame here for your self-portrait. You are going to use this to make a self-portrait. You can print this and do your self-portrait on a solid piece of paper, or you can use our drawing tool to draw a picture of yourself. In the line right underneath the frame, we need to tell our audience who is in this portrait. So your name will go right here below. In the lines below your name, there's some space for you to write about yourself. In our portrait, we're going to make a whole portrait gallery in this unit. We're going to draw portraits of lots of important historical figures. In a gallery, there is usually the name of a person or subject or of a painting, and then some information about that person. We'll do this with our portraits of historical figures, but today your job is to write 2 or 3 sentences about yourself. What's something that you think is important about you that you would want people to know? When you are finished with your portrait and your 2 or 3 sentences about you, go ahead and turn this one in.